We're living in a generation where we're experiencing the incremental destruction of our individual rights. As recognized in the Declaration of Independence, we are sovereign men and women with rights endowed upon us by our Creator. This is what their country is based on. This is what the revolution was based on. This is what our separation from England was based on when we fought the war for independence. I have personal experience in this field, and it's really what is behind my run for Congress. I have stood with countless people, minorities, women, whistleblowers, victims of police and government abuse of all kinds, and have fought with them through the courts, and have seen the stripping away of their rights, have seen the denial of their rights and deprivation of their rights, first outside of the courts and then inside of the courts. And that's really the core frustration that led me to run for this office, because what is happening in the courts is symbolic of or very similar to the expressions and frustrations that people are feeling outside of the courts. People feel they no longer have access to their government. And my experience is that they do no longer have access to the government. Over the years, I've worked with Democrats, I've worked with Republicans, I've worked with Tea Partiers and Occupy Wall Streeters and people from the sovereign rights movement. And the sentiment is the same, that the government no longer works for the people. And the central focus of my campaign is to return government to the people. Now, my personal experience is through the courts. The courts were historically the most visible aspect of our government. They were what people saw on a day-to-day basis. They were where the most important decisions were made that regulated their affairs and their day-to-day lives. And it's no longer that way. The courts used to be open. Go across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and to go into some of these old courthouses in courts across the state and see how grand and cavernous some of these are, where hundreds of people could sit in these courtrooms. And they would come and they would watch justice be administered on a day-to-day basis. That's no longer the case in America, and it's no longer the case in Pennsylvania. And I have personal experience with it. Now we have in Pennsylvania an Article 5, Section 10C of the Pennsylvania Constitution, which insulates and separates the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the state court system apart from the checks and balances of the other branches of government. And we have, most importantly, now we have bar associations and courts and lawyers and judges administering justice in this country. And it was not historically that way. Bar associations were not part of the foundation of our country. They are not part of the fabric of our republic and our democracy. They are creations that came from elsewhere. It's time in this country that we start to look at what the foundations of these things are and to understand how we are losing control of the courts. Now, Thomas Jefferson said in 1821 that the germ of destruction of this nation is in the courts. He called them an irresponsible body, that they were accreting by gravity, like by night and day, the encroachment into fields of jurisdiction traditionally held by other branches of government. And that over time, they would eradicate the checks of one branch of government over the other. That is what is happening today. That is what my experience has been. That is what motivates me to run for Congress. These are not issues that are talked about on a regular basis by politicians across the country. They don't understand, we don't understand as a people, the importance of the role of the courts in maintaining and establishing the rights of the individual, preserving the sovereign rights of man, the rule of common law, and our rights under the Constitution. And these are the things that we are going to go back to and we're going to continue to study. Now, my experience is what brought me to these points. You know, over time, in representing people in this field of constitutional rights, time and time again, people would come with the clearest of cases, and I would file the case on their behalf, and we would get decisions throwing their cases out, dismissing their case, denying their evidence, and things of that nature. And it just built over time, where it was so difficult to continue to explain how these were rational and just decisions in the administration of justice. And I started to question that. I started to talk about it. I started to write about it. I know other lawyers have had similar experiences. I've worked with a great man and great lawyer by the name of Don Bailey, who has represented hundreds upon hundreds of people in the federal courts. And his experience often largely proved the same, that cases were brought, people came to the system damaged and injured and abused by their governments and their employers, and they would go into courts only to get abused again. And what happens then from there is that lawyers are singled out for discipline. And the lawyers who are singled out for discipline more and sanctions more than any other lawyers are the lawyers who are out advocating for the constitutional rights of their clients. And the facts bear this out. There are rules that prohibit or inhibit lawyers from talking about corrupt judges or bad judges or things of that nature. And they are singled out. The disciplinary process is used to silence people who want to talk about the issues that are going on with the courts. And what happens over time is that you start to question for yourself. Now understanding that the vast majority of people never have to deal with the courts at all. They never go into courts. They don't understand it. You go to a legislator these days with an issue by the courts and he hands off it. The media, while they may report the sensational cases on landmark decisions like an abortion case or an equality of marriage case or things of that nature, when it comes to the day-to-day operation of the courts, you do not have a media that focuses on it. And there are certain institutional reasons that this happens, and these are the things that I want to talk about and I want to study and I want to continue to talk about. Human experience shows that when rational understanding of things breaks down, you look for things that would explain it that are out of the ordinary, that are not the typical explanation for things. That it's not just a judge who didn't understand an issue or an attorney who wasn't competent to present an issue. The fact is that individuals all across this country are no longer able to go into courts and represent themselves. They no longer can go in and have juries of their peers decide their cases and have it be done in public. The bar associations, the lawyers, and the judges have created a system that has taken access to justice out of the hands of the common citizen anymore and has placed it into the hands of this culture, this class of lawyers and judges. And it's not a fair system. It's not a just system. Justice is not being fairly administered in this country, and that is one of the core problems that we are facing. That is what is leading to the erosion of our individual liberties. That is what is leading and causing tremendous frustration out there in people. That is what is causing people to feel that their government no longer works for them. It creates fear. It creates apprehension. It creates distrust of their government. And these are the things that we need to talk about. It's time for us to investigate the foundations of these things. It's time to look at where bar associations came from. There were no bar associations that were in this country. It's not a creation of in the Constitution. They weren't referenced in the Declaration of Independence. They didn't even exist until after the Civil War in the late 19th century. And where did the whole notion of bar associations come from? These are the things that you start to look at. When the system is breaking down, you start to look at where it broke down and why it broke down. And these are the things that I've been looking at, and I want to continue to look at a much deeper level. And when you compare it to the English system, in English, the Queen appoints what are called Knights of St. John, historically, to administer law in the British Commonwealth. And these Knights of St. John formed a sovereign organization called the Middle Temple. And the Middle Temple created bar associations that controlled the education of lawyers from law school and the admission to the bar and administered law on behalf of the Commonwealth. And when we transition that, we have to ask questions. Well, why are lawyers in the United States called esquire? Where did that designation come from? What's an esquire if not a servant of a knight? And that's what the definition of it is if you look it up in the dictionary. Why do lawyers hold themselves out as esquires? Titles of nobility have no place in our country. We have rule of law. We have the common law. We have a constitution that defines the rights of man. We have sovereign men and women endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And an esquire is a title of nobility, creates a superclass of people. And lawyers and judges in this country have extraordinary control over the political goings-on in this country. I've talked about that in other segments. You know, the whole existence of the corporation today and corporate culture and banking institution depends upon the lawyers and judges and the protections that they have built in for these institutions over time. Well, there's another problem that this leads to, and it's a very rational problem when you start to analyze these things at this level. What is really being served here? I have been in court too many times and seen too many individuals sent away from the courts knowing that their rights are violated. I mean, these bonds with your Creator, nobody is more in tune with what those bonds mean than the person who's had those bonds severed. And we have to depend on our courts to protect those bonds and those rights when they are severed. And they are no longer protecting those rights. And when time after time after time these rights are severed and the courts fail in protecting those rights, it causes one to question what really is going on here. If the bar associations in the English system, the Knights of St. John and Middle Temple, are controlling courts above the surface, what is controlling courts below the surface? Who is controlling courts below this surface? Too many times this has happened over the course of my career and in my experience that I've seen other people suffer through than to just accept that there are bad decisions being made repeatedly. It causes one to look a little bit deeper into what's going on. Now, the Knights of St. John also they have created Freemasonry. And I know through my experience, through talking with many people and hearing what you hear, that even though Freemasons is a so-called secret society, that there are many Freemasons in the courts. They are lawyers and they are judges. The tradition among Freemasons is to know that being a Freemason gives people better access to justice. This is an enemy of the law. Secret cabals, secret societies interfering with access to justice, controlling courts, controlling the administration of law below the surface. And they are perverting justice. They are enemies of true justice, of true divine justice as recognized traditionally in our country and through the course of Western civilization. These things need to be understood and they need to be eradicated, they need to be corrected. There are enemies of justice in this system. I don't know the exact dynamic, the exact dimensions what these enemies take, but there is something amiss in this system, something that needs to be understood. Common law rights need to be restored in the courts. Constitutional rights need to be restored. People need to be able to go into courts and to represent themselves and to have access to justice, to have their cases fairly administered, to have juries make the most important decisions in their lives, and not judges and not lawyers who have created this system of control and secrecy. The judicial branch in this country today is largely without checks and without balances over the other branches. Or the other branches, you know, it's a little bit different in Congress and the federal branch and in the state branch, but I've talked about Article 5, Section 10C in Pennsylvania and how that has created and separated out the Pennsylvania court system from the checks and balances of one branch over the other. These are federal constitutional rights. They are the rights of man that need to be protected and preserved, and they need to be done so on a national level. You know, our forefathers fought for these rights endowed to us by our Creator. They shed blood and they died for them. They sacrificed enormously to protect these rights. If we don't start to recognize where we are going here and we continue to lose these rights over time, it's going to be too late. It's not too late now. There is plenty of time for us to educate ourselves. You know, our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, one of the greatest intellectual founding fathers, has said that the surest protection of liberty and justice is the education of the citizenry. It's time for people to be educated about these issues. This is why we're losing our government, and it's time that it be taken back. We need to fight for the preservation of our individual rights. We need to stand behind congressmen, legislators, individuals out there who are willing to step onto a public stage and talk about these issues. I am one of those persons who is going to do that. It's my experience that has brought me here, my frustration, my grief over the loss of these individual rights and the destruction of families, the favoritism shown to corporations and banks over time, the minimization of the rights of the individuals. If there are secret cabals, organizations of men and women that are subverting justice in America, it's time to seek them out and to eradicate them and to return justice to true justice. True justice, equal justice under the law. Ben Franklin, another one of our tremendous intellectual founders of this country, was asked after the Constitution was passed what kind of government was given to the people, was given to you and I. And his answer was, it is a republic. And a republic recognizes the fundamental right of the individual, the sovereignty of the individual, the bond between man and his creator as paramount in this society. It recognizes government as a servant to man, as a servant subordinate to that bond between man and his creator. And when Ben Franklin said, I gave you a republic, he said, we gave you a republic if you can keep it. Well, now's the time in our country where we have to fight to keep this republic. This continual erosion of the rights of the individual over time, and this expansion and the recognition of extensive government empowerment, and I call it by conservative activist judges, or by liberal activist judges, or by whomever you want to blame it on. But the fact of the matter is that the rights of the individual have been diminished over time. We're losing those rights. The playing field is tilted in favor of the big banks and big corporations. The rights of the individual are not recognized. It's time to get back to fight for those rights, fight through an intellectual and a moral struggle so that we don't have to shed blood like our forefathers have done. It's time to fight to keep our republic, as Ben Franklin had advised. So let's keep that republic, and let's get back to basic understanding and restore this country to the base principles upon which it was built. Thank you.